So basically, I think, okay, so I wrote about people who act against or without
Yeah,
regard for a moral principle, and they seem to
yeah,
have great lives or succeed, after they've made amends. You remember the examples I gave. And he said that, okay, there are two different ways, two different reactions you can have about violating a moral principle. So the first is this one, the second is this one.
yeah,
And then he's saying actually the right way to think about it is not one. It's number two. You've conceptualized something incorrectly when you think about it in terms of one, meaning
mhm,
if I am thinking about violating a moral principle in terms of, oh, something bad will happen to me, that is not the right way to think about it. I understood that much, right?
yeah,
Um, so, I mean, the first he's saying is suggests that I'm neutral on, I thought that was interesting. I'm neutral on the idea of, for example, using a stolen resource to further my business. It's just, I
yeah.
don't want to get caught. Um,
Mhm.
okay. And then this is where I'm unclear. So one is, I don't want to get caught. Two is, it's not going to help me lead the life I want to live if I don't follow
Yeah,
these moral principles.
right.
And this is where I'm kind of lost in the abstractness of the wording, and we can have a read and then I'll discuss.
Sure. Yeah, I get that part.
You
Understand
do?
it.
Because I
Yes.
see, this is why I'm confused. I wrote here, what, let me just get my mental footing here because, okay, so one, in the example of one where I I'm scared of violating it, well, in the example of one, the attitude reflected in one, which is that I'm scared of, let's say, being punished, or not punished, but being punished by reality for violating a moral principle. Like, stealing is
Yeah,
not an effective strategy, so
yeah,
something bad will happen to me. That's one. He's saying the attitude expressed in that view may seem to be required by the objectivist view that moral principles give us the fundamental means to the end of life, but that's a misunderstanding of the view. Fundamentally, the means to life is life itself. Okay, this is where I'm stuck. Isn't it the case, though, that they give us the fundamental means to the end of life, the moral principles?
he
So,
is not saying it's wrong. It's given that it may seem like one is right. Given that
okay.
they are the
Oh,
means,
okay.
one would seem right. But it's a misunderstanding to say that one is implied by that. He's saying one is about consequence. They only think about it because it has negative consequences. They're just kind of neutral on the value. It's just like, can you get away with it? Can it just result with the consequence you like, or a consequence that feels appropriate, looks appropriate? That's what he's
Okay.
talking about, like focusing on the consequence. Oh, I don't want the negative consequences. That's the only objective. I mean, he's saying that's the wrong look. I mean, yes, it's
Uh,
true. You should look about means to the end of life, but I think he's saying it's a bit short sighted to phrase it that way or think of it that way about just do you avoid the bad consequences?
But then what does he mean by, like, what is it adding here? Because this is supposed to be, I'm assuming, this passage
Life.
here, which I'm going to make blue, is supposed to somehow illuminate the error in the
Yeah.
previous view. But I don't know what to do with the means to life as life itself. That is to I don't have any concretes for that. I have no idea what that means.
I'm trying to read
And
ahead because reading
oh,
ahead
okay,
seems to be the answer.
okay,
What is the process? When she presents a thesis, will gain and get back concept of action. The means to life is life itself. Well, he's kind of describing the process that is a mean within itself, that to reach the end requires living. The end and the means is life. They're one and the same because the process is continuous. You're always going to life and you get there by means of life. It's like self reinforcing.
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean, you can't, it's a constant process, not something you get to and then you reach the point you win. It's like you
Okay.
get there, then you got to get there again and again and again. It's constant. It's
I
a
got it.
constant process.
But what I'm confused by is, okay, so life is, I think you just said, is self-generating, self-sustaining
Yes.
action.
Yes.
But this is, I realize that this is somehow supposed to illuminate the mistake I've made, but I do not, like, I can't make the connection between what he's saying here
Yeah. He's
and
being a bit
the error in
abstract,
the
I think.
previous, the error. Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah. Which is, I just don't have the, it's good. It's pointing out something I don't understand. I can tell that.
I think I need to keep reading to know what he's saying exactly.
Okay.
Probably like when Rand presents it. I'll just go part by part, just because, like, yeah, that so far I'm not totally clear what he means, but I'll have to keep going because
Yeah.
he's getting to his point. I mean, that's so far, that's what I understand him saying. So then when Rand talks about it, that again could be a constant process. Yeah, that's she's describing life as in itself what I just described. It's constant, always feeding into itself over and over and over. So what is that process? He's asking. Right after that, that's where we're next. I mean, there could be other continuous processes, like, I don't know, like the life cycle of a star, even. It's in some sense continuous, or we could talk about another continuous thing, but he's just focusing on life, just so we just focus on human life rather than whatever other cases we might think of.
Also, what is he getting at when he's saying fundamentally the means to life is life itself, and this is a corollary of the thesis that life is an end itself? Like, what does this add? And what, I don't really get what that's telling me.
To me, they seem the same. I don't know how it's a corollary to me. They are stating the same thing. I'm not sure the difference in the sentences, so I'm not really sure.
I can ask him. I just didn't want to, because I have so many questions. I was gonna like let I was gonna ask you all of them, and then basically try, because I don't feel that I get a lot of it, and then that way I can have, like, I can whittle it down to the more
Well, I
quality
guess
questions.
he's distinguishing the end and means to an end, saying, but the correlate that life is an end in itself also means that the process is itself. I think that's what he's saying. Like I've stated, like you reach living by living. Like it's like almost redundant to say that.
I I remember asking you. You probably won't remember, but I remember a lot of the questions that I ask you. I remember asking you that like how to think about the virtues. Are they values, or are the like when she says man's the three primary values are reason,
Yeah.
purpose, self-esteem. Reason is also a virtue. Self-esteem in a sense is pride, or like the exercising
Yes.
of, well, okay, self-esteem maybe not, but reason and purpose are in a sense virtues as well, but they're the three cardinal values. And so I was asking you about, like, other virtues values,
Yeah, I
and I
remember that.
can't, okay, you do remember. And so I thought maybe that's what he's getting at, is that actually in a sense they're all values, like the virtues are values, they're all one and the
I
same
think it's
thing.
a similar idea. The
Okay.
process is the same as the thing you get. Like life is a thing, you get life, like you're alive. But then the process, I mean, in a way, they're kind of supporting each other. The process of life is gets you life. The
So
process gets you the thing in a way.
there's a sense in which we actually, virtues are values.
In a sense, I would say so because you can't separate them. They're inseparable. You can't have virtues without values. You can have values without virtues, I would say.
Sure. Sorry, say that again. You can have.
I don't think you can have values without virtues, or
Right.
vice versa. You can't have virtues without values.
So could you say then virtue is a kind of value? Maybe that's what I thought he was getting at.
Hmm. I don't think it really matters,
Okay.
practically speaking. I mean, I
Okay.
can make the conceptual distinction, but it doesn't seem very important or critical. I mean, they both just are part of the same thing. That process of attaining your life, to living your life, self-generating your life.
It fits in with the objectivist formulation of ethics, which is to provide man with a code of values to guide his actions and choices. So a code of values includes the virtues. So it's all compacted into values.
I would say so. That sounds right. Or pretty close anyway.
Okay.
So we're talking about self-generated, self-sustaining action. That
Mhm.
continuous process I'm talking about, that it feeds into itself always, that you can't escape it if you're really like, it's a constant thing. They tell us what.
Sorry, not to confuse you, but some of this read is still him
Yeah,
talking. So
I figured once I started reading it.
I've marked it all up like crazy. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, it's saying what I'm saying. The principles show you the method, or they delineate how to get there, but also what the end is.
What does that mean?
Delineate, point out, like outline,
But
like draw a
like,
line around.
how does, I don't get how the virtues also delineate. Could you, what comes to mind? Like, what does that mean?
Well, honesty, take that one. Like, what is honesty? I mean, maybe I'll do this kind of Socratically. Well, what is honesty? It's not not a trick question. Just
Yeah, so it's the refusal, or it's embodying this attitude of not faking reality, always paying attention to the reality that is. So if one of the formulations of one of the axioms is existence exists, then it's like the emphasis is only existence exists. So it's focusing on what is and not refusing to fake anything else. But what I don't get is like we don't say honesty for honesty's sake. It's not like a thing for itself,
right.
as far as
That's
I
right.
can conceptualize it. So why is it also like, how is it also the end? That's what I don't get.
Well, when you say honesty, what does it, when you're saying that, doesn't imply something about what its function is, what it's for? I mean, you're saying it doesn't fake reality. What function is that? What does that? What would that imply about it if you followed honesty? What would it point out? What does coming up to this conclusion that not faking reality and taking it for what it is, in what I'm trying
Okay,
to think
so
of. This is a
I guess I could say, well, but then it doesn't feel like an end anymore. I'm saying, well, I can't fake reality because I want to live in this one, and for me to live in this one, I need to only
I should
recognize and
finish.
acknowledge.
I probably should finish the paragraph though. I'm
Okay,
getting
cool.
ahead of myself. Okay, so when you have honesty, in a general sense, it's stating a means to attain that end of your flourishing. I mean, keep in mind that you form the concept, the objective is understanding of it in the context of recognizing your life and how to get there, how to attain that as an end.
Yeah.
Like you're implying, what does it bring you? What does values can you attain with it?
Okay.
It's stating a means to say that there's a means to attain these values, but it's also in relation to like there's a value to, or there's a reason to not faking life or not faking reality. It's really hard to make this clear actually now that I'm thinking it through. I can visualize it, but it's hard to put into words.
Yeah,
Um,
this is, I could tell immediately that this is getting at something that very different from how I've been
it
thinking about it
is.
before. So it's worth unpacking, but it's difficult for me.
Yes. Like clearly he thought about writing this before. Like I've thought about this, I just never really had to explain it. Let's see a different way to approach this. Um,
Yeah. So
I
also,
would
I
say
mean, there's a cut.
focus on the over time Rand characterizes life in ever more precise, comprehensive. Um,
See, okay. So he says here, the moral code gives us a way of life that is an end in itself. I don't like, unless he's talking about happiness, but that I'm confused by that. I always thought that was at the end. And then also, like, it gives us not only the fundamental means by which we should live, but a conception of the end to be aimed at. So again, that they seem separate. And then why is the end a life that upholds certain principles? I thought that the reason you uphold, see, I can see that I'm thinking about this differently. I can tell that I don't get this. So that's why it's so interesting. But like, I thought that to uphold certain principles gets you a certain kind of life. It's not that you uphold principles for principles' sake.
yeah, let's think about more generally really quick. So as we were saying about virtues and values, like there's a means to get to that end, but then once you get to the end, you're not done. You have to go through the means again. Like
Right.
you attain the end, that thing you get, but you have to go through the means again. That the process of getting there, you're always in that process. It's not about like, oh, I've avoided catastrophe. I've won. Now I'm done. I don't need to go through that process anymore. This is getting
Right.
at the idea that it is a constant process, even if you maybe avoid catastrophe. It's You have to ask yourself, is this a factor of living that process? Is this the process of life? Is this the fullest capacity to that you're using your abilities and capacities? Are you going through that process consistently and constantly? It's not just that
Okay.
you've avoided catastrophe, but that you're living a certain type of life appropriate to man that's in and of itself fulfilling. Even if you did all those so-called exciting things, would they really be exciting in the end? Is kind of what
Yes.
it's getting at.
I think that's how, like, if you wanted me to essentialize what I did understand, it's what he's saying is that the focus is on fulfillment and there's no other way to get fulfillment. So, yes, okay, like you can't think of like steal this and you'll get away with it. And you can't conceptualize that without the framework of a particular standard. This goes back to my other thread. And the only standard you have which gives you fulfillment is this one where you don't steal. So you're thinking about, will this help me be fulfilled? No, it won't. I can't say anything, or I'm not going to say anything or conceptualize what negative consequences will be. All I do know and can validate is that this is not going to help me be fulfilled. That's basically what I understood of what he's saying.
Yeah, that you're attaining some other kind of life that isn't the objectivist sense or man's fullest sense. And it is
Right.
some other kind of life you would be living if you didn't follow the principles. But it's not the kind of life that's man's nature that fulfills your capacities, that uses those capacities to the fullest extent. Like we mentioned about intellectually, that's using your capacities to the fullest extent, which is your
Yes.
principles. It's not just that oh, it's nice, you got $1 million or you had an exciting life. No, it's that your life itself was fulfilling, deep, and full of value and meaning and purpose, even if it might not seem exciting on the outside. If you actually live it out, it's probably more exciting than you'd realize. That it emotionally deep down, it's more fulfilling than you might ever realize.
Right. So, I mean, so it sounds like I do have the essence of what he's saying.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that there's some gap in my knowledge somewhere, which I don't know what it is, which prevents me from being certain that this is the case. Because,
Yeah,
like if I have a conversation with a friend, hey, I'm studying philosophy because I think, or I get to the point where I'm like, I think I'm not going to pirate this. I'm not going to accept this course because I'd rather pay for it. And he'll be like, oh, well, that's completely impractical. Like you can learn from it now. You don't need to pay for it. And I was like, well, no, that won't help me lead a fulfill life. That I'm not convinced of that, and I don't think anyone else would be. is
yeah.
is my point.
I mean, certain principles you need to validate more, but as far as the right attitude about principles, it would be that, like, what's the type of process you're leading? It's not just the end you attain. It's not like, oh, you get to life, you're done. No, it's not just getting there. Like, the getting there is constant. The process is constant. It's not like if you're trying to say, I don't know, let's say build a house, that the end is just static. Like, once you build it, that's it. It's like, oh,
Got
you
it.
just need to um, make sure to build it before it rains, not that a constant process of avoiding rain, or it's just a consequence you're avoiding, just trying to build it before, say, I don't know, before the
Before
new owners move in,
lockdowns.
or before lockdown, say. Yeah.
But then what is that? Okay, I see that some some ends are static, and then the end that is life is ongoing. Like you don't just get there and
Yes.
you're done. But then
Yeah.
what does that add to that perspective of virtues as not looking as at virtues, like the error in looking at virtues as like the focusing on the bad things that will happen if you don't follow virtues. What how does that relate to that error?
Um, well, principles are what error do you mean?
So my error, which is well, apparently my error. What did I do with this? Yeah, at the beginning
Yeah.
where he's talking about if I
Right.
were to do that, then somehow, although I don't know exactly how things would go badly for me, and he says
Yeah.
it's the wrong way to look at it. Now, what I'm asking is what I'm asking how it relates that life is ongoing, because I can see he's saying there's a mistake, and then he's going
Yeah.
on to talk about this thing of life being ongoing, but I'm not seeing the connect. You know what I'm saying? Like they're
I think
almost
so.
distinct blocks of information to me, and I'm trying to understand why that relates to this. I've read this like 4 times and I still
Yeah.
don't. I'm definitely gonna reply, but
The error being that the first one isn't really a life as a process, because you're just looking at, like, how do you get there? How do you get to life? How do you get to that flourishing life? That there's, all you have to do is avoid the bad consequences, and that's all it needs to be. But
okay.
that's kind of avoiding that. I mean, they're not just a means to an end. They serve a function in your life that is the functioning of life. If you're acting in this way, if you're functioning with honesty, that's what life is supposed to be like. It's supposed
Okay.
to be that process. It's not just that you use it to get somewhere, but that is living, in the same way that eating is part of. It's not merely that, oh, you need to consume food to continue getting nutrients. It's that part of life is eating, part of life is breathing. I mean, those are automatic, obviously, but they're part of life. You can't just say you do it merely to attain an end. They're a constant process as well. It's a biological sort of process that it's always going, and it's just by nature any animal needs to do those things. It needs to
Mm,
be breathing. It's not like it's just like you decide to breathe now because it gets you somewhere, but it's rather it's a constant thing That when
Okay.
you're living, you're breathing. When you're living, you're being honest. When you're living, you're eating. When you're living, your heart is beating. That's
Okay.
how I think of
Interesting.
it.
Okay. All right. I need
And
to.
the same way, you can't take, if you take out your heart, well, you're dead. It's in a similar way, if you take out the principle, in a similar sense, you're dead because you get rid of an essential part of your functioning, an essential part of your living, or at least important for your health. And maybe you might live if it got damaged, but you can't really remove it. It's part of that process of living.
Right. I'm having a lot of trouble convincingly. Like okay, I get it. It's like there's definitely a split. I get that in the abstract, but I just can't.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to go, yes, that's true. I can see why, and
Yeah.
I can see how. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. I think a lot more that's just thinking more, but I think you're following it a bit better, at least the two ways of thinking, at least that they're different. I mean, there's obviously a lot more to get, but it's gradual, of course.
I think this is where he talks about
Means
the
and ends. Yeah.
yeah the virtues being values. Let's see. Yeah. So this was it's a good reply, but it's difficult. Let's see.
I do fundamentally agree with him. Like what he's saying is like what I'm trying to say too.
Here we go. You don't reject stealing because it will lead somehow to a
Right.
bad outcome, though the details of how remain unknown, but because it is incompatible with and offers nothing to a life of productive achievement. So it is not the case that we're like, it could be the case that I could download a course or get given a pirated course. And hey, I actually learned something from it. And I start a business or whatever it is, and I make money and I do it from that. And so in a sense, from a certain perspective, I could say, hey, it's practical. Like, I didn't pay anything, and now look, I started this business. But what
Yeah.
he's saying is that doesn't matter. It's not going to help you be fulfilled. That's the claim.
I think so. Like broadly speaking, yes. Of course, it's
Okay.
hard to illustrate that, but I think that's
Of course it is.
really the
Yeah.
point.
Okay.
That's the point. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The proper life to the life of a rational being.
Because he says it
Yeah.
might be true that if you were to steal, some bad outcome
Yeah.
for you would inevitably ensue. Um, but something else. So he's like ignoring that. It's irrelevant. He's saying something
Yeah.
else would be true. Insofar as you're willing to steal to achieve your goals, you would have altered the overall end you were aiming at in
Mhm.
life. I,
Yeah. It's a different kind of thing than the rational life, than the flourishing life that
right.
Aristotle might think, or the life of a rational being. It's the life of some other kind of being,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that being might be. It could be a hedonist, it could be a nihilist, or whatever it might be.
Right. Okay. Yeah. All right. I get it. Whether or not a particular bad action leads to a negative consequences, it serves to corrupt what you're aiming at life. Okay. I get it. I've been looking at this wrong, but then that would mean that I need to keep going and somehow prove to myself that if I have to prove to myself basically that this is definitely the only way to lead a fulfilling, flourishing life by
Yeah.
following these principles all the time without exception.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if there was anything else in there.
This is always a justification for what he's saying. And he's
Right.
using the fiction as the best way to illustrate, easiest way to illustrate that.
Yeah. Okay, so he's talking about the alternatives to this life. What kind of motives lead to those alternatives and the ways in which those alternatives function to undercut a person's capacity for self-generated action, both
Mm-hmm.
materially and psychologically. Okay. I mean, here's another example. I get it. But then when I think of like, if I think of my friend downloading courses, it's hard to see him being undercut. Seeing his, if anything, he seems to be like bounding with life. So it's hard to see his capacity. For, you know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like it reminds me of when I read little bits from what is it, Understanding Objectivism,
Yeah.
and he talks about how he was speaking to a student or someone who said, "I don't get this. Faith is against religions are faith-based and therefore they're irrational and again anti-reason." I know I have some religious friends and they're very intelligent and reasonable. It reminds me a bit of that about that because it's
Yeah.
similar here. I don't see this. Okay.
Mm.
I don't know if you've got anything else to say. We can skip it if you want.
Um, um, yeah, it seems a lot of the similar things I've been saying. Let's see
Okay.
what else that we could do. Let's see another particular question about it.
No, I
I mean,
think we
there's a
can.
lot, but
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think we can move on.
yeah.
Um, oh, actually, this is a passage from a book I read on Korea, and I many months later I remembered it, and I was wondering if it violates a hierarchy. And it's a small passage we can go through and then discuss about work,
Yeah.
and then I'll tell you.
Okay. Let's look at this. Let me see. Where's this from?
School of Life, it's British, just so you, if you get an idea of the language. It's a philosophical organization. They tend to like a
Yeah.
lot of the very pessimistic philosophers like
Yeah.
Schopenhauer and Kierkegaard.
Yeah. The third one seems like not true to me. The first three, the question whether work might love
Sorry.
or work seem laughable. I mean, it seems like through most history, most people thought their work was fulfilling in some meaningful way. That's what I would have thought.
Okay, so that's what I was wondering about originally. Is I thought that I wasn't sure if this was a violation of a hierarchy or because they're trying to compare a specific, in a sense, they're comparing feudalism to
Yeah, it seems just like there's kind of
freedom,
feudalism. Yeah,
right?
feudalism sucked beyond compare, and probably more people didn't love it. I mean,
But
or at
is
least
there
in the in the British history, probably in particular, it was probably like this.
I don't know if a violation of a hierarchy is the right thing. Maybe I don't know how to word this, but it's like if you compare work under feudalism to work under capitalism or relative, let's not go capitalism, but work under relative freedom, then is that what would you call that? Because it's not, it wouldn't be valid, right? It would be like saying, hey, look, in communist Soviet Russia, people starved, and so we shouldn't look at as being able to eat food as normal. Like what I don't know what era that is, but I picked up on it and I thought about it.
I would say it's being concrete bound or something like the frozen abstraction fallacy, where the abstraction of work is just based on, say, I don't know, this feudalism, but not trying to extend it to other contexts and
Right.
other times in history, that you're not
Okay.
comparing to the Greeks or the Chinese Empire or whatever. I mean, people, work has been always how it's always been. Some people hate it, some people love it, fulfilling the some. Others think it's like the same pattern has been since the beginning of civilization. There's lazy people who don't want to do anything, people who love doing work, working hard,
Right.
and everything in between.
Do you, so okay, so it's not a violation of a hierarchy. Do you think that my take on a lot of their writing, and this is probably a good sample to look at if we want to critique it together, is that they're often very flowery in their language, but it's not clear how good their arguments are and if they're based on a very well thought out analysis of the concepts. So, for example, they write here at the top, we should but profoundly appreciate for its high degree of purpose, camaraderie, and creativity. It's like they just threw in some words there because they sound nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you had to, would you say it, if you had to describe, would you say it's kind of flowery, but not necessarily strong on the analysis?
It doesn't seem good on actual examples.
Okay.
Tilled the soil or yeah, well,
Who even knows
yeah.
if that's true, right? Like who tilled the soil and herded animals?
I mean, it happened, but it's like what? It needs to be more concrete, more specific. It's just very general. You're like, there's things people did. I mean, what does it even mean by work? Does it mean manual labor? Does work include writing, or do we just mean what we do to make money? And I don't exactly know what it means by work.
Right.
I mean, there's some truth, I think, with the Romans. At the bottom, some Romans thought like ideally, like the educated, like this work is humiliating. You have your slaves do it. And in some way that you just don't get your hands dirty. It's not that they didn't do work, quote unquote, because they worked at the Senate or whatever high class thing they did.
Right.
Some of them just really like, I don't know, just socialized basically, but some were in politics and others within war and others in philosophy. It's not like it was just a set thing.
Right. Okay. All right. I think I was, yeah.
Or even say like, maybe certain cultures I can think of, like a lot of even nowadays cultures that are mostly poor areas in say Italy, people love their work. Their work is part of their flourishing life. Like they farm and they cook what they grow. They enjoy the food they make with the simple life that they lead on the farmland. I mean, there's certain attitudes like that, and that's not something just in the past 20 years. That's been around for hundreds of years in Europe, especially Southern Europe. And Southern Europeans are more like that. They're more leisurely and more about the flourishing. Northern Europeans are more about like work hard and just put up with it or whatever. There is that distinction in culture, especially if you compare, say, Britain to Italy. Italy is very carefree and as compared to Britain, for example.
Wow. How do you know that?
Well, just reading about it, but also Nietzsche says something about that and just being aware of cooking culture. And I love cooking a lot. So, I mean, I read about the culture of Italy. And it's easy to tell what kind of life they lead, or even.
I'm always weary of generalizations about countries. It might be the case that things used to, I don't know now, I have no idea about Europe now, but let's say it might be the case that things used to be like a certain way, but now with everyone connected over the internet, at least for some people, there's, I'm going to guess, less differences, but I haven't traveled enough to really know.
My awareness is usually about reading about food and food journals and things like that, where I do get an idea of what people enjoy to do and what not the filthy rich do, what just everyday people or just the farmers do. What do they do? And they're usually quite fulfilled about the work they do and the food they make, because that's part of their life that they lead. It's not about just like they're getting rich. I mean, it is deeply fulfilling what they do.
Yeah.
I've thought about it too myself. Like would it matter if I was famous? Like, I honestly don't think I would even care. Like, maybe I used to think it'd be cool, but it's like,
well,
would it matter? I don't know.
It might also be, there's also perspectives that demonstrate that it's negative as well, because suddenly this attention, you have attention, but you also have attention when you don't want attention. You have attention to the mistakes you make, and some people might attack you for them. Whereas, I don't know, there's also negative, right? So, but okay, I mean, the main thing with that passage is it doesn't I was wrong on I didn't catch a violation of a hierarchy. It was just other errors.
Yeah, I think it was just a hasty generalization on their part, or maybe they're not trying to generalize it enough. But yeah,
Yeah.
compared to feudalism, this is definitely a clear truth to it, I think.
Also,
Or
the premises are
just
questionable.
yeah, some of that too.
Okay. And I noticed you said filthy rich. Isn't it interesting? Because I've used that expression before. Isn't it interesting that we associate like to be very rich is like filthy? It's like bad.
I know. I
How
thought
fascinating is that?
I always hesitate when I say it, but it's like, how do I don't even know another phrase.
I don't either. I've used that. I've used it too. But it's interesting that in English, it's so like our ethics is so built into the language that if
Yeah.
you're rich, you're filthy.
Yeah. I definitely say it with the sense of tongue in cheek, tongue in cheek irony.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's filthy. I'm glad about that.
What
I don't want
about
to be filthy.
you could probably say it's cleanly I don't know, cleanly rich. I don't know if that works, but
I like the
okay.
sense of being sinful, like I'm being bad, like I'm
Yeah.
violating Christian ethics. Like I feel
Okay.
like better when it's like, yeah, you better believe it's filthy.
Antichrist rich. Okay, anyway, let's not. I actually really want to read Nietzsche. I think am I right in saying that he'll be easier for me to read with you than Aristotle? Because Aristotle seems ridiculously hard of what I've read.
It depends.
Okay.
Nietzsche could be ridiculous
That's
hard,
not
but
the answer. That's not the answer I'm looking for.
it's definitely what about them you're reading. Nietzsche could be wildly difficult, but other times he can be very simple.
Okay.
Aristotle, depending on the topic, like if I talk about ethics, it's usually not so bad. If I talk about politics, not so bad. But if I get into metaphysics, well, that's a totally other story.